orders of the day.
Neonatal Care Leave and Pay Bill, second reading.
You have to say now. Now. Stuart McDonald.
I beg to move that the Neonatal Care Leave and Pay Bill now be read a second time. Madam Deputy Speaker, after such a smooth start, it is good to see you in your place. It provides me with an opportunity actually to thank you and congratulate you for your flawless oversight and running of the Private Members Bill ballot. Indeed, the impeccable taste you showed even when picking numbers out the hat. But I do seriously think you can be very pleased with the range of bills that is before Parliament today. Can I also welcome the new Minister to her place and wish her well. I was grateful to meet with her predecessor and his officials to discuss this bill and work together on it, and I appreciate the new Minister ensuring that work could continue in the week since her appointment. And I hope she is as enthusiastic about this bill as both her predecessor and I are, and I'm absolutely sure she will be. Indeed, from our first discussion, she definitely is. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, we should all be enthusiastic about this bill, which I think is a brilliant bill and which I know will make such a huge difference to tens of thousands of families each and every year. And that is because this bill paves the way for the introduction of neonatal care, leave and pay. I'm grateful to all honourable members for being here to consider this proposal, and I very much hope to support it. Madam Speaker, we will never be able to get rid of the stress, the anxiety, the doubts, the questions and indeed the trauma that so many families experience when their baby is in neonatal care. But what we can and what we must do is help to relieve some of the practical and financial challenges that accompany that experience. I'll happily give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I am delighted to see that this bill has come to the floor. And I know other honourable members have sought to bring it previously and have done a huge amount of work in this area, and I hope that the government really does put its full weight behind it. My constituent, Cody Dorman, who does a lot of work, as my honourable friend will know, with Bliss, had a premature son, Matthew, who is now thriving, but she spoke about the months that she spent going to see him in neonatal care, how different the experience was, and then after that how different maternity leave was, and just the stress and strain of having to worry about money all during that time. His bill will hopefully take away some of that stress.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for her intervention, and it's precisely hearing about those experiences that has prompted me bringing this bill forward today, and it's campaign groups such as Bliss and the smallest things that I'll come to in just a moment who have really driven this forward. Indeed, my honourable friend also mentioned that there are honourable members here today in the chamber who have personal experience of a baby in neonatal care, and I'm particularly grateful for their participation in today's debate, because that personal experience makes them the best advocates for this cause, and many of them, such as my honourable friends for Glasgow East and for Paisley North, and the honourable member for Thornbury and Yate, have been passionate and articulate campaigners for reform for a considerable period of time. And we are joined too, I'm very pleased to say, in the gallery by the charities Bliss and the smallest things, representing families who have direct experience of the challenges around neonatal care, and I'm immensely grateful to them and so many other organisations and individuals for their help and support in taking this bill forward, and indeed for the campaign that they've been driving since long before I was even elected to this place. So I hope that the families with lived experience of neonatal care who are watching today will be satisfied that we have represented the issues they have faced and indeed are facing right now with the careful consideration and compassion that they deserve. Madam Speaker, the Office of National Statistics reports that an estimated 100,000 babies every year across the UK are admitted to neonatal care following their birth. Many of these babies spend prolonged periods of time on a neonatal care unit in a hospital as a result of being born prematurely or with other health conditions. This, of course, is an incredibly worrying and stressful time for parents and indeed their extended families. I'm sure all our hearts go out to everyone who has found themselves in this position. Parents will naturally want to be able to focus their attention simply on getting through this period, supporting each other and their newborn. There's an emotional imperative to be with their babies, of course, but also a practical one. Those vulnerable little children need their parents, and those parents need to be with their wee ones. As the charity Bliss have highlighted, parental presence on a neonatal unit is essential. Babies have the best developmental outcomes when their parents can deliver hands-on care. However, some families struggle to do this while being able to keep on employment and earn a living. Fathers only get 2 weeks of statutory paternity leave, which is good, but it's only 2 weeks, and when this runs out, they must be called back to work whilst their baby is still in hospital. But how can any parent be expected to focus at work while their sick baby is undergoing life-saving, life-changing neonatal care? For babies who have an extended stay in hospital at the start of their lives, mothers report that 39 weeks of paid maternity leave does not give them enough time. This gets used up during the neonatal care, and they don't feel that they have enough time at home with their baby before they need to go back to work. Some mothers may choose to leave work as a result. Indeed, research by The Smallest Things shows that 1 in 10 mothers weren't able to return to work due to the ongoing needs of their babies who had required neonatal care. Their research also highlights two incredibly concerning, but perhaps unsurprising statistics, given the emotional trauma of a baby being born premature or sick. The charity reports that 77% of parents said they experienced anxiety after neonatal care, and that nearly a quarter had actually been diagnosed with PTSD after neonatal intensive care. In short, their conclusion is that we need to strengthen the statutory rights and support offered to these parents, because that would give parents the emotional and financial support needed at a time of great stress and trauma, in turn leading to better postnatal health, a more positive return to work, and better outcomes for children born prematurely. I'll have to go.
I thank him for giving way and commend him and bringing forward this really important bill. He won't know that I got in a taxi the other day with one of his constituents, who was the driver, who said their baby had spent nearly 3 months in hospital following problems and been born prematurely. His employer was not at all helpful, so after his 2 weeks paternity leave he had to go back to work. It was incredibly stressful. Everything you're talking about rings really true, but he ended up having to leave that particular employment because being with his wife and his baby was far more important. That's why this bill is so important for families.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and there are employers out there who already actually do provide this for their employees, and they are to be absolutely commended. But unfortunately, as we've heard, there are too many who do not. Sometimes it even forces fathers to use sick pay for extended periods of time, which is far from ideal. And on other occasions, as we've just heard, people are forced back to work. So at an incredibly distressing time when these families need each other the most, we should be doing what we can to support them and allow them to spend that precious and vitally important time with their babies. As Bliss have highlighted, the main reason that parents on maternity leave return to work before they are ready, and why parents taking paternity leave return to work while their babies are still in neonatal care, is financial pressure. Bliss estimate that additional costs of a neonatal stay is at around £250 per week by the time we factor in travel costs or buying food and drink at the hospital, extra childcare, and even accommodation costs if the hospital was far from home. That is obviously a significant financial burden, and one that I'm very glad was recognised by the Scottish Government's Neonatal Expenses Fund, now the Young Patients Family Fund, in 2018. The successful passage of this bill will create a new statutory leave and pay entitlement for the parents of babies receiving neonatal care. Employed parents who find themselves in this immensely challenging situation in the future will know that, as a minimum, they are entitled to time off work to care for the babies, and that they won't suffer any repercussions as a result. Crucially, this bill will allow parents to have protected time off work to care for their children in such a difficult time. I'll be happy.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend opposite for bringing up this bill. I just wanted to express to him, how much I support what he's trying to do. As somebody who was employed myself, and my wife, who is also a constituent of Broxtowe, had our twin children, who were 6 weeks premature and 3 weeks in neonatal care for one of them, how much I support his bill.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, and as I said earlier, I think the most powerful advocates and the best arguments come from those with direct experience, so I'm really grateful to him for staying behind and for lending his support this morning. As I said to my own friend in answer to an earlier intervention, we do know that there are some brilliant, supportive and flexible employers out there, such as those who are signed up to the Smallest Things Employer with Heart Charter, and I would like to take this opportunity to commend them and to ask them to continue to support their employees when these circumstances occur. But we do all know, and we have heard already, that there are employers who are not as forward-thinking, or indeed some who cannot afford to be as forward-thinking, and it's those employers and parents who work for them that we need to particularly consider when putting the provisions of this bill into law. But in short, that is why neonatal care, leave and pay entitlement is not just desirable but absolutely essential to protect and support parents at this very difficult time. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn now to explain to the House just a little bit more detail about what the bill and the powers that it sets up are designed to achieve. Much of the framework and the terminology borrows from other related statutory rights, ensuring consistency, compatibility and hopefully ease of implementation. I'm grateful to Parliamentary Council for their work in drafting the bill to reflect the important policy goals. Neonatal care, leave and pay will apply to parents of babies who are admitted into hospital at the age of up to 28 days and who have a continuous stay in hospital or in other agreed care settings of 7 full days or more. It's intended that eligible parents will be able to take up to 12 weeks of paid leave on top of their other parental entitlements such as maternity or paternity leave. Neonatal care leave will be a day one right, meaning that it will be available to an employee from their first day in a new job. Statutory neonatal care pay, like other family-related pay rights, would be available to those employees who meet continuity of service and a minimum earnings test. Parents will have an entitlement up to 12 weeks of neonatal care leave, 1 week for every week that the child spends in neonatal care. This leave will be protected and a person should not suffer any form of detriment due to taking that leave. As I've said, statutory neonatal care pay will be available to employees who meet continuity of service and minimum earnings tests, and it will be paid at the statutory rate, currently £156.66 or 90% of the employee's average wages, whichever is lower, and should be operated in line with increases to statutory payments. Again, this mirrors the existing family leave and pay provisions such as paternity, shared parental and adoption and maternity pay after the first 6 weeks. Employers will be able to reclaim spending on neonatal pay in a manner similar to other statutory payments. It is expected that some parents, for instance fathers who have only 2 weeks of paternity leave, may want to take their neonatal leave while their child is still in neonatal care. But once maternity leave commences, a mother cannot stop it in order to take neonatal care leave, or else she will lose her remaining maternity leave rights. So neonatal care leave will therefore be flexible so that mothers can add it to the end of their maternity leave and other forms of parental leave that they may be entitled to. So this flexibility therefore allows an employee to take the leave at a time that best suits them when their child is receiving or has received neonatal care. And with that in mind, the bill provides for the window of time within which neonatal care leave can be taken to be set out in regulations. And this window will be a minimum of 68 weeks following the child's birth, as this ensures that mothers and fathers have sufficient time to take their neonatal care leave alongside other leave rights that they may be entitled to, rather than having to lose out on any such entitlements. Madam Speaker, I'm not aiming to persuade every member that every single aspect of the design of this scheme is perfect. Of course, there are arguments that it might not be. There are debates to be had about statutory rights and entitlements, about support for the self-employed or for workers who are not technically employees. We could debate whether pay like leave should be a day one right. Some might ask whether we should raise levels of statutory entitlements. And while 12 weeks of leave and pay will cover the overwhelming majority of cases, others might ask if we could go further. But in the first place, it's important to remember that the bill and the regulations will set out minimum standards for neonatal leave and pay. Employers can and do already go beyond, and we will encourage them to continue to do that. And in any event, while these are all fair questions and issues, they are for another day and relate to statutory rights more generally, not the principle behind introducing this new one. Today, I hope we are taking a really significant step forward in expanding the range of statutory family rights to leave and to pay, a step that will make a big difference to tens of thousands of families every year for generations to come. There is overwhelming support for this change from families, from trade unions, from health professionals, from employers, and it's supported, as we've heard, from MPs of all corners of this House. And indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a very rare and remarkable bill indeed that will at one and the same time deliver on a specific manifesto commitment both of the Conservative Party and of the SNP.
Here, here.
So no more should we be leaving parents to use up maternity and paternity leave travelling great distances to a neonatal ward. There should be no more forcing fathers back to work after 2 weeks with their newborn still on a ventilator, separating families at a crucial time. No more leaving mum to cope in the neonatal ward facing significant decisions alone. No more depriving babies in neonatal units of the support of both their parents. And no more making parents choose unnecessarily between being with their newborn baby in hospital and being able to secure an income through work. Madam Speaker, this bill will help thousands of parents each year to spend more precious time with their premature and sick babies. So we need this bill to succeed for them. So therefore, in conclusion, I hope honourable members on all sides of this House will share my desire to ensure this bill does indeed succeed. Collectively, we have an opportunity to effect real change, and I think it's our duty to ensure that those who will have to rely on such provision going forward are fully able to do so.
Thank you. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Luke Hall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm genuinely, absolutely delighted to rise to support the Neonatal Care Leave and Pay Bill 2022. For me, I'm sure it's the same for members in this House, and I know many families around the country. This is much, much more consequential than any political debate happening this week that might be receiving more attention. I couldn't be happier that we are here at second reading. So can I sincerely thank the Honourable Member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkcaldy East for bringing forward this bill and for introducing it in the way that he has. I thought he spoke really eloquently about some of the challenges facing parents and outlined why it's so important and took us through some of the important elements of the bill. I know he understands how important this is to so many people. And can I also record my thanks to the Honourable Member for Glasgow East for championing this bill as chair of the APPG and for helping us ensure that it gets to second reading today. Every year in the UK, tens of thousands of babies receive neonatal care. And for the families of these babies, as we've already heard, this can be life-changing. Neonatal care is the type of care that a child receives in hospital if they're born premature, at full term, but with a condition or illness that needs medical attention or a particularly low birth weight. Rather than families then bring their child home shortly after birth, the child is admitted to a special neonatal intensive care unit, NICU, to receive the support that ensures they have the best possible chance of survival in some cases and of quality of life. There is a huge wealth of evidence that suggests that the more time that a parent spends with their child in NICU from as early as possible, the better their chances and outcomes are. This bill will crucially allow parents to take additional time off work when their child is in neonatal intensive care, ensuring they are no longer in that ridiculous and impossible position of having to choose between keeping their job or spending time with their child. Once this bill is enacted, neonatal leave and pay will be available to employees whose child spends more than 1 week on a NICU unit, providing up to 12 weeks paid leave for qualifying parents. Currently, parents of a child in neonatal care rely on those existing statutory entitlements, which we've already heard, so they can be off work with their child in hospital, which means that parents spend a proportion of their maternity or paternity leave with their child in hospital, and babies who have spent a long time in hospital after birth are, of course, naturally at that earlier stage in their development when their parent then has to go back to work and compared to their peers. This is, I think, particularly challenging for lots of mothers who want to spend that extra time at home for their child, and for fathers and non-childbearing parents who often go back to work when their child's still in hospital, sometimes still on ventilation, still being fed through a tube. It's completely unacceptable. And all of this has only ever led in one direction, which is reduced parental involvement, huge pressure on families, and reduces that opportunity for bonding at such an early stage.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way and for the honourable member opposite for bringing this important bill to the House today, which has such great support. He touched on a really important point. My constituent got in touch with me to tell me about her experience when her child was in neonatal care. Her husband forgone his parental leave until after the baby came out of hospital in order that he could spend that time with the baby then at home. Those missing weeks really do matter to the bonding and to the parents and to the child. So I really welcome this bill today.
Can I thank my honourable friend for making that point? And she's absolutely right, because all of this only ever leads in one direction, which is parents being with their children less in hospital. And the main reason for that is simply because parents cannot afford to take the time off of work. And this is happening to families of premature children every single day up and down the country. For me, like so many other families, and I think members here today, this is personal. In my own family's case, I remember my wife being admitted to hospital 22 weeks into her pregnancy, being told she could give birth at any time and that she would have to stay in hospital for the duration of her pregnancy, and having to wait day by day, hoping that she would stay in hospital and the pregnancy would continue. I remember the late night phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning from the hospital, hoping they were bringing good news rather than bad. And I remember the incredible day when he was born just at 28 weeks. He weighed 2.4 pounds. He was absolutely tiny. He stayed in NICU for 72 of the longest days I could possibly describe before coming home. And I think it's important to say this because for so many families of premature children, this is a very, very long journey. It doesn't start the day the child's born. It doesn't start after the first day or the 8th day. It starts often months beforehand. There is a huge mental toll, as we've heard already, of parents being in NICU with their child. We know the majority of parents' mental health suffers. Of course it does. Parents, whatever the circumstances, want to be with their children when they're born. That's completely natural. But when your child is so small and so vulnerable, it is painful to be apart from them. You just want to be there. And there are too many parents having to sit with their children whilst in incubation, worrying about whether they can afford to pay the bus fare home. We cannot allow that to continue, and this bill will play an important part in stopping that happening. So people, I think, were delighted when numerous parties made this manifesto commitment to introduce neonatal leave and pay. Look, I would have loved this to have been delivered 2 years ago through a government bill, but I have to be honest, that doesn't matter to me today. All that matters is the government embraces this as the opportunity to deliver this important commitment that we've made with open arms. On the bill itself, I do want to thank both the Honourable Member and the Government for the way that they've worked with us so far on this. Also the previous Minister, the Member for Sutton and Sheen, who gave so much time talking to us about how we could find a vehicle to deliver this. I know the new Minister will take up the cause with equal vigour. There are a couple of points I wanted to raise. First, on the timing of the introduction. I think this is really important because the normal practice would be for this to be introduced at the start of a new financial year. Back in March 2020, in the budget, the government committed to introducing this in the 23-24 financial year. It set the funding aside for it. And of course, to meet that, what is now an incredibly challenging timescale, this bill needs to pass through Parliament quickly. So I'd perhaps just like to ask the Minister, when she winds up, to talk a bit about the proposed introduction date, whether we can still meet that 2023 target. I believe there is precedent for bills getting done through this quickly, and this is really important because if we introduce this in 24 rather than 23, it will just needlessly leave thousands more parents in this situation for a year longer than is necessary. We've been having conversations with the previous Minister for quite a long time about making sure the background work continues whilst we were trying to find a vehicle to deliver this bill. In December last year, the Minister assured me that the Department were working with HMRC and drafting up the guidance for businesses, making sure HMRC's IT systems were ready and everything else. So I would like to perhaps just ask the Minister if she could update us on how that work's progressing, whether the guidance will be ready on time. The second is perhaps a technical point that's probably more for committee. I did see the qualifying date was 7 days, which was completely expected, but the 7th day starts the day after birth. And I just wanted to perhaps raise that as a point that we can discuss at a later point during the passage of the bill, because it seems perhaps a tiny bit out of odds with some of the ways that the neonatal care days are recorded, certainly in England at least, not sure about other parts of the UK. So perhaps it's something we can discuss at a later point. Madam Deputy Speaker, delivering neonatal leave and pay will help thousands of babies born needing neonatal care to benefit from their parents being where they should be, by their side, providing that hands-on care which is so vital. It will deliver support to thousands of parents who need it during the most difficult days of their lives. I'm hugely grateful to the Honourable Member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkington East for choosing this bill, for delivering it in the way that he did, and the Government for backing it. This bill is uncontroversial, it's got cross-party support, we've waited for it for a long time, and I'm hugely proud to be here to support its passage that will help deliver on our promise to so many families.
Yeah. David Lindman.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by paying tribute to my honourable friend, member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkington East. I think when I told him that he'd come top of the private members bill, he thought that I was just somebody who was interested in procedure, notwithstanding what happened earlier. But actually it was because I was so keen to see this bill come forward. This, of course, was a bill that I sought to bring forward, I think, in 2018 via the 10-minute rule motion. But it is a testament to how generous and how warm my honourable friend is that he has been presented with this opportunity of winning the parliamentary lottery an opportunity that many of us would like to see the private members bill process reformed, but the fact that he has taken that on, I am incredibly grateful and will be forever in his debt. As he's done too, I wish to also pay tribute to the former Minister, the Honourable Member for Sutton and Cheam. He and I have been discussing this, meeting about this, being questioned on the floor of this House for a very long time about it, and it was becoming quite clear that with the absence of an employment bill, that the most sensible way of dealing with this, particularly with the cross-party support that we have, was to decouple that and take it as a standalone bill, and I'm glad that we've gone down that route. There are a couple of other people that I'd just like to pay tribute to and to recognise, particularly Katrina Ogilvie from the Smallest Things, and Josie Anderson and Beth McCleverty from Bliss. They have been people that I've been working with for years on this, and the fact that we are seeing this finally go through the House is a point that is something that's an enormous pride. This is, of course, the culmination of many years of work, not just by MPs, which I'll come on to in a moment, but most importantly for the parents whose children are born premature or sick. And I think that politics is actually at its best. I am not, it's no secret, I am not a fan of this place. I do everything every single day to try and get out of here. But if the House will indulge me just for one moment to say that this is probably one of the best moments that we've had here, because what we're seeing is politicians coming together, putting party politics aside and actually using their personal experience. One of the reasons why the all-party parliamentary group on premature and sick babies works so well is because the officers of that group all have one thing in common. It isn't the fact that they're members of parliament, it's the fact that they are the parents of premature and sick-born babies. So I want to thank my honourable friend from Thornbury and Yate, the honourable lady from Sevenoaks, my honourable friend from Paisley and Renfrewshire North, honourable gentleman from Broxlow, and indeed my honourable friend from Pontypridd, who have come together to put that party politics, indeed constitutional politics, aside to ensure that we do deliver for those families. This is a bill that is not particularly controversial. It's a relatively short bill. The budget line only commits to about £15 million, as my honourable friend from Thornbury and Yate was saying, in terms of the 23 budget, but it will have a massive impact on the families of those 90 to 100,000 babies who every year are born in the UK and spend time in neonatal care. As the House will recall, both of my children, Isaac and Jessica, were born premature. In Isaac's case, we only had about 14 weeks from finding out that he was going to arrive, to him coming into the world. And I still remember that moment when it was moved to an emergency caesarean, whipped away to neonatal intensive care unit. And the real worry that was going through that time, actually in both cases, for both my children, my parental leave was well up by the time they get out of hospital. In the case of my daughter Jessica, who is now 3 years old, she spent roughly the first year of her life on oxygen and many weeks and months in the neonatal intensive care unit. I think my honourable friend from Thornbury and Yate kind of hits the nail on the head when he talks about the mental health impact that this has on parents. I still remember very vividly and well until my dying day watching my daughter turn blue in the incubator with noises, alarms, lights all going off and neonatal nurses rushing in to resuscitate her. The idea that we as legislators would expect our constituents to be at work when that's happening, or worse still go and do a shift after that, really is, I think, something that we are putting right today, because that is a historic wrong. There's also a point as well that for employers will not get the best out of their employees when they're sitting at work, staring into space, worrying whether or not their child is going to make it through the day. They're also not going to be in a good space when they realise that mum's back on the neonatal intensive care ward and doctors are coming round talking about massive consequential decisions that families are having to take, whilst the dad or another parent perhaps is sitting in front of a computer in the office. So I think that's why it is so important. There are, as my honourable friends have said, good employers out there already, Sony Music, Waltham Forest Council, South Ayrshire Council, who all have innovative policies in place. Interestingly, we have a big debate in this House about proxy voting. As far as I understand it, proxy voting still doesn't have provision for neonatal care leave as well. So although there will be a period of time before we can get royal assent, this House could get its own house in order for ensuring that we have some form of neonatal leave immediately with proxy voting. Yeah, I'm happy to give way.
Thank the honourable friend for giving way and congratulate him on the excellent work that he has done over many years on this issue. My own Chief of Staff, Stephanie, had two her twin girls, Abby and Jessica, during the deepest, darkest lockdown of winter 2020. So she had the double pressure of having 2 premature babies, herself being quite ill, and then also having to go in and out of the neonatal unit. And so much of what he says rings true. And I hope I did what I could as an employer. But I felt that my hands were tied as well with the rules of this place. And everything he talks about is so... I remember trying to give her all the support I could. Her partner worked offshore. He had to go back offshore and not even be in the same place as her after that. So everything he says and everything that this bill brings forward, does he agree, will be so important to our constituents, our staff, and staff the length of the breadth of the country. It shouldn't be left up to individual businesses to make policies. This needs to be in legislation.
Yeah, my honourable friend from Livingston makes a good point, and as well as reforming some of the issues around proxy voting in this place, which I accept only impacts a very small amount of us, one of the other things that could happen is that IPSA, the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, which of course is responsible for setting many of the policies and conditions around how we, as members of this House, employ staff, could certainly do an awful lot more, not just to bring guidance, but to reform their rules. As I was making the point that there are a number of good employers out there, I've mentioned them already, but one of the things that we saw as a result of the P&O scandal is that there are, sadly, still far too many employers out there who are too tempted to gild the lily, to cut corners, and to undercut their staff. Now, I will not depart from being very conscious that this is a cross-party consensus this morning. I won't depart from a belief that the sooner that we have an employment bill before this House, the better, so that we can try and deal with some of the other issues. My honourable friend, the member for Lanark and Hamilton East, for example, has an excellent proposition on miscarriage leave as well in pay. So I think it's really important that the Minister looks to see how we can bring forward an employment bill. But ultimately, this bill will end the lottery that far too many employees across these islands have to pay. I would agree with my honourable friend from Thornbury and Yate about the need to expedite this bill. I still have a concern that although we're getting the bill a second reading today, let's get it into committee as soon as possible, let's get it to the Lords. My preference, frankly, would be to do all stages on the floor of the House. There is precedent for that, given the immense cross-party agreement on this. This is the kind of thing that, frankly, we could get through in the space of a couple of hours. There is one other thing that I would put a challenge directly to whoever the 2 final candidates are for Prime Minister. I understand that there will be an enormous temptation on the part of whoever becomes the new Prime Minister to call a snap election. The danger with calling a snap election in that regard is that the House would prorogue and that this bill would not receive royal assent. So I would like to get a commitment from both those candidates that they won't play fast and loose with that as well. There are many, many more things that we can do to try and support families who have had premature and sick babies. We need to look at the neonatal workforce. That is an absolute ticking time bomb that is going to go off in about 10 years' time. We need to look at the school admissions code, certainly in England. We need to look right across the UK at the poor hospital accommodation for parents. Far too many parents are having to stay in hotels well off-site. That is particularly challenging, for example, for mothers who are breastfeeding, and all sorts of other issues as well. And my honourable friend, member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkcaldy has already made reference to the Neonatal Expenses Fund, something that we have in Scotland. We're incredibly lucky to have that, but that is not something that's available to our friends in other parts of these islands. And then lastly, one of the things that we're going to have to look at is the postcode lottery, the absolute desert of counselling that exists across health boards and NHS trusts. I think it's been well rehearsed this morning that having a baby that's born premature or sick, it can have a serious detrimental impact on the mental health of parents, and frankly it is just up to your luck whether or not you get that support at that time. So I very much look forward to this bill going into committee, ensuring that it passes the House speedily and can receive royal assent, and with that I commend it to the House.
Jill Mortimer. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I also congratulate the Honourable Member opposite on this very important bill. As Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Maternity, I know all too well that more support is needed for parents of babies in neonatal care, including statutory pay and leave. I'm proud that the UK already has a range of policies in place to support parents in balancing work and family life, including family-related leave and pay entitlements, the right to request flexible working, and protections from detriment for parents seeking or taking time off work to care for their families. However, it has become increasingly clear, both through national consultations and my work chairing the Maternity APPG, that we should be offering even more support to parents whose babies are in neonatal care. This was a key pledge in our 2019 manifesto, and I'm delighted to support this bill. Although I do not have a neonatal care unit in my constituency, our midwives at the Rowan Street and Hartlepool are superb. They are some of the most caring and loving people I know. Even still, no care, however brilliant it is, can truly beat that provided by parents themselves. Parents whose babies are in neonatal care should be able to spend as much time as possible by their baby's side, holding them in their arms, feeling that tiny heartbeat, stroking those first hairs on their head, shouldn't be overshadowed by worries of work and pay. We all know that this skin-to-skin contact in the first weeks of birth are essential to ensuring better outcomes for babies and their parents. Long periods of direct care by parents can improve breastfeeding rates, increase weight gain, improve infant reflexes and better motor development, and reduce pain during invasive procedures. But too many parents are excluded from this direct care. As my honourable friend for Thornbury and Yates and the honourable member for Glasgow East have already said and shared their emotional stories with us, which I thank them very much for doing, it is a particular problem for fathers. With only 2 weeks of paternity leave currently available, many fathers, 66%, have to return to work long before their babies are well enough to come home. In fact, in around 70% of families with a significant neonatal stay, one parent had to return to work while their baby was still being cared for in hospital, often in another city miles away from home. Although mothers are entitled to longer leave than fathers, many mothers also have to return to work before they should. This is because mothers whose babies are in neonatal care use weeks or months of their maternity leave while they are still in the hospital. When their baby comes home, mothers may only have a few weeks with their baby before their statutory maternity pay comes to an end. Mothers returning to the workplace when their baby has only just left neonatal care simply cannot be right. But this isn't just about the financial worries of parents. It is also about addressing the emotional trauma a parent goes through when their baby is seriously unwell and in neonatal care. As many as 80% of parents report that their mental health deteriorated after their neonatal experience. They deserve our full support, which I believe this bill will do. No parent should be forced back into the workplace when their baby is in neonatal care. The financial and emotional stresses caused by the current system cannot go on. I join with colleagues across this House in supporting this bill, and I hope that mothers and fathers across the country will be reassured by the contributions made in this debate today.
Alan Dorrans.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning. May I begin by congratulating my friend and colleague, the member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East for securing this private member's bill and for his decision to use this opportunity to introduce a bill on this very, very important subject. The bill makes provision for dedicated leave and pay for employees with responsibility for children receiving neonatal care. I would hope it would receive cross-party support, as it is a long overdue policy development in this country. It is a situation that I am sure members of all parties will be familiar, if not through personal circumstances, as previously outlined by honourable members this morning, and certainly in family, then certainly many constituents will be affected by the current lack of financial support and security. At the moment, parents must spend a proportion of their maternity or paternity leave with the baby in hospital. Babies who have to spend a long time in hospital after birth are usually at an earlier stage in their development when their mother or parents go back to work in comparison with their peers. That can be particularly upsetting for mothers, many of whom would have liked to have additional time with their child but cannot afford to take any more time off work. This initiative has my strongest support. Leave and pay with responsibility for children in need of neonatal care represent one crucial element in a wider response to the needs of these children and their parents. Before considering the benefits that will result from implementing such a policy, a few words on the other essential elements to a large extent depend on the best result on the parent's ability to take time off to be with their baby when it is at its most vulnerable within hospital-based neonatal units and services. Madam Speaker, in February 2019, the then Scottish Health Secretary, Jean Freeman, MSP, visited Cross House Hospital in East Ayrshire, only a few miles from my constituency. She was there to announce the launch of a Scottish Government initiative backed by £12 million in dedicated funding to test a new model for neonatal care. That scheme offers all expectant mums care from a primary midwife alongside a small team for their entire maternity journey. Support will be on hand to help parents with babies in neonatal units to provide as much day-to-day care for their newborn babies as possible. In March 2019, this scheme was welcomed by the House, an early day motion tabled by SNP MPs. This bill builds on that good work in Scotland and provides benefits for mothers, fathers, siblings and extended families across the United Kingdom. Madam Deputy Speaker, after decades of falling neonatal mortality rates for all socioeconomic groups, we now see a deeply worrying rising trend in the more deprived groups, beginning only 2 or more years after the UK government austerity policies were first implemented. The SNP MPs at Westminster have long been aware of the even greater impact of austerity policies in England, where the lack of mitigating actions of the kind implemented by the Scottish Government have resulted in even greater levels of poverty, and in particular child poverty. The scale and demand for neonatal care is considerable, and this from the charity Bliss, the leading charity whose vision is that every baby born prematurely or sick in the United Kingdom has the best chance of survival and the quality of life. Every year, Madam Speaker, over 90,000 babies are cared for in neonatal units in the United Kingdom. These neonatal units and the services they offer are both central and fundamental to the care of vulnerable children, but they cannot always be fully utilised by the parents unless they are supported by this dedicated leave and pay entitlement, enabling them to be able to afford to do so. What the Honourable Member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East proposes recognise is that a critical element in making a success of neonatal care, the parents' ability to take advantage of the existing highly skilled and professional neonatal care units. However, there are wider benefits. Research in 2018 showed that 80% of parents who have had a child admitted to neonatal intensive care units feel their mental health suffered. Of those, 35% of parents reported that their mental health was significantly impacted. The inability to afford to be with their child for the full time in the neonatal unit was a major factor in these outcomes. The cost for these individuals personally and for the impact it can have on employment and the family can be immense when we consider that many thousands of families are affected. Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, this bill is of considerable importance to the most vulnerable in our society. It will help families at one of the most difficult times in their lives and will demonstrate that we, as a country, recognise the value of providing support to parents and families who need it at the most emotionally difficult time for them and their families. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill has my strongest support, and I hope it receives the full support of the House. Thank you.
Ed Arger.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the honourable gentleman, the member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East, on bringing forward this hugely important bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's about 4.5 years since I last spoke from this place in the chamber, and it feels a little unfamiliar, but it's right that I'm doing it on a sitting Friday for private members' bills. One of the great benefits of being a recently ex-minister is that I have the opportunity to speak in debates like this and to put my support behind some excellent private members' bills such as this. And I also say it is also perhaps somewhat surprising that I also welcome the fact that the Scottish National Party are helping implement a Conservative manifesto commitment for us. I don't think that that would happen very often, but it is testament to the ability of this House to come together around issues that really, really matter. And I have to say, Fridays, often people will watch the proceedings in this House during the week, Prime Minister's Questions, and they will see the combative nature of politics. I would encourage many more people to watch sitting Fridays like this, where we see the House come together to deliver outcomes and legislation that genuinely make a difference to people's lives. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very pleased to be here today. That and, of course, the persuasive skills of my honourable friend, the member for Castle Point, who does an amazing job in encouraging all members, when they're able, to come in and contribute on a Friday to important debates such as this. And I welcome my honourable friend, my neighbour, the member for Loughborough, to her place on the front bench, and I very much hope that she will be in that place for many, many years to come. The context of this bill was set out very ably by the honourable gentleman, and I think it's 1 in 7 babies will require neonatal care of some sort, and 50,000 babies will require neonatal care of over a week in hospital. So the context and the need is very stark. And the honourable gentleman opposite mentioned a number of other factors, for example, the need to look at within our hospital settings, the support available for families, the accommodation available for families, the simple things like catering facilities. And I would encourage my successor in the Department of Health and Social Care, as we look to build new hospitals and upgrade hospitals, to bear that very much in mind as we design those facilities. But this bill goes to the heart of what is really hugely important to those families. Too many families are being asked to choose between their livelihoods and their work and their duties, their obligations, and their time with their child and their family. And I have to say that this debate today reminds me, and those who were members of this House back in 2017, 2018 will remember it, the debates we had on what is now the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Act 2018. In the context of those debates, we talked about the fact that many businesses, as has been said, do the right thing. They make that support available even though they are not compelled by statute to go as far as we are going to hopefully move today. But there are some who don't. And that is why it is right that we are legislating today with this bill to put that right and to fill that gap. Now, it reminds me not only of those debates, but the Children's Funeral Fund, which the Honourable Lady, the member for Swansea East, I believe, campaigned for, and I was the minister who put that in place. Again, hugely important. Now, they are both measures that are in place when the worst happens. And thankfully, we are not talking about the worst happening here today. We are, however, talking about where babies need more care, more neonatal care in hospital. But there's a common theme that runs through those pieces of legislation, those measures already in place, and what the honourable gentleman is proposing today. And that is about giving parents the time, the space to be parents, to be with their children, to process what is going on, without at the same time having to constantly worry what is happening to their job or their family finances, and to choose. Of course, I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way, and I'd like to place on record my thanks for all the help that you gave to me when you were a Minister. I'm really grateful. I pledge my support to this bill because during lockdown I was blessed with 2 grandsons, and the provisions in this bill would have made a huge difference to my daughter Angharad and her husband Kieran, who we call Shaky, but that's another story. That would have made a huge difference to them, so I pledge my support to the bill today.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, and again, it has been a pleasure and a privilege to have worked with her on a number of issues during my previous stint in the Department of Health. And I have to say again, that goes to the heart of what I was saying when I opened my remarks about how much we can achieve in this House, how much is often not seen outside this House, by working across the aisle, across the chamber, on making often small changes, but changes that genuinely make a huge difference to people's life. Now, we've heard that there is already a degree of support available, the ability to request flexible working, a degree of statutory support, which is welcome, but it does not go far enough, and it doesn't address that challenge of those businesses who choose not to do the right thing, not to be flexible, not to support those families. So I hugely welcome what the Honourable Gentleman is bringing before the House today. There are, of course, details to be worked out, and that, I hope, can be done speedily and efficiently in committee, possibly in anticipation of a longer stint on these backbenches. I'm happy to volunteer to the Honourable Gentleman. If I'm still on the backbench at that time, I'm very happy to serve on his committee for this important piece of legislation. And it is hugely important. No family, no parent should be forced to choose or feel they are forced to choose between being with their child, having the space to be with their child as they're in neonatal care, or their livelihood and their job. And yet, every day, there will be parents who are having to make that choice at the moment. That cannot be right. And that is why I hugely welcome what the Honourable Gentleman has brought forward in this bill. I look forward to supporting it today, and I look forward, should he so wish, to serving on the Bill Committee to help make sure we get this into legislation as swiftly as possible. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Lynn Bryan.
I'm very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm really delighted to be considering this important private member's bill this morning, and I want to really thank the Honourable Member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East. I've practised. Kirkintilloch East. I have honestly practised that, I'm sorry, for bringing it forward. And can I say what a pleasure it's been following the Honourable Gentleman. And whilst the party opposite occupies the Treasury benches, I just think it's time for him to be back on the front bench, because we can't do with without his talent. He is a massively respected member, and it would be good to see him back where he belongs. I'm not going to keep this House long, because I just want to put my support on the record. A friend of mine gave birth to a very premature little girl some years ago. And I know that she stayed with that little girl in the hospital day in and day out until she was ready to leave hospital. I know that time was truly precious, but I also know that it was terrifying. Thankfully now, Esme is doing really well. She is a tiny little dot with the hugest smile and the biggest amount of energy and life. She's just got a zest for it in a way that is a joy to behold. She's thoroughly engaging, and she's doing so very well at school, despite being the youngest and I'm sure the tiniest in her class. But if her mum hadn't been able to stay there day in and day out, I'm not sure the prognosis would have been as positive as it has been. And I want to make sure that all families get to be there for their little ones when their little ones need them most. As we've heard, every year tens of thousands of babies are born premature or sick, and they need to remain in hospital. Their parents want to stay with them, of course they do, and have a say in their care. They just want to be with them. And right now, we know that there are parents who want to stay with their baby, but simply can't because their employer simply doesn't get it, or because they can't afford to take time off work and lose essential income. As we've heard, according to the charity Bliss, for every week their baby is in hospital, parents end up having to spend an extra £282 on average. And we all know that for many people, this simply isn't possible without incurring a huge debt, a huge and absolutely debilitating debt. It's not right that parents are having to take sick leave instead of neonatal leave, because taking sick leave when you're not sick comes with a certain stigma. And frankly, at the moment, employers don't like it because they can't reclaim statutory sick pay, so it's costing them money. It's also disincentivising employers from doing the right thing and offering paid neonatal care. We've got to keep this in mind, that these mums, these dads and these other carers, these other relatives are going through hell. And I'm really hoping that today we're going to do all we can to ease some of the terrible pressure that they're under and their support, their right to paid leave. Across this house, we often talk about giving children the best start in life, about equal opportunities, about levelling up. If we mean what we say, and we truly want to give newborn babies the best start in life, we need to make sure that their parents can be there in the hospital with them, to bond with them, to develop that early bond. We need to make sure that parents, including dads, can maintain that skin-to-skin contact with their babies, which is so important for development and bonding. Because we all know how damaging and traumatic it can be to separate a child from its parent at such an early age. And we also know that a major way of looking after children is actually through helping their parents out in these crucial times. For those who have to cope with the additional strain of a child in hospital and the terror, the trauma that goes with babies being sick or premature, additional support is so desperately needed. Because if we want them to have the best chance at keeping their families together, of supporting each other and enabling healthy, emotional, education and social development of a child, we've got to give them time with the baby. A law to allow paid leave for neonatal care has been a long time coming. So I hope the government will honour its commitment to ensuring paid leave for neonatal care and ensure the smooth and quick passage of this bill. Thank you.
Dean Russell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I also congratulate the honourable member for his bill today. I won't even attempt to say your constituency, but I'd love to visit one day. So, so I won't speak for too long, but I did just want to make a few points from the speeches that I've heard. First of all, I absolutely endorse and support this bill today, and I will do all I can to support it, passing through at each stage. It's such an important thing. And I think when I look to those that I've known and friends who have had to use neonatal care, I think the words that were mentioned earlier about the personal experience are really the things that come to mind. And I know from my honourable friend from Thornbury and Yate, and also honourable member, but also I'd like to say friend, from Glasgow East as well, from your personal experiences, really touch one's heart, because those precious moments, even the first seconds of having a child, are embedded in our souls and our minds and our memories. And I remember when my daughter was born, thankfully not needing to use neonatal care, but those moments, the whole 9 months leading up to that, and the seconds when she was born, they sear into you, and they create tears, they create memories and the hopes of the future. And I cannot imagine what it must be like in those first few weeks for a parent to feel that they're stuck at work when they want to be with their child, when they are at their most precious and their most vulnerable and most fragile. All you would want to be is to just be there and support them and be able to, even if you cannot hug them, know that they're close enough to do so. And for me, this bill is much more than just legislation. It's about doing the right thing. It's about compassion. And I come into politics because I believe in people. I believe we need to have a compassionate society. And sometimes across this house we may disagree on how we get there, but this is one where I think we can come together to make sure that we do deliver on that. In my constituency, where my daughter was born, actually, is Watford General Hospital. Then they have a neonatal care unit there. And I've worked actually in the maternity unit in the filing area when I was volunteering during the pandemic. And actually one doesn't realise just how much work goes on behind the scenes by the staff to get to the point that a child can be born, and then the weeks after to make sure that they're safe. And during the neonatal period, actually it's intense. There's so much that goes on, and there's so many moments where you just need a rapid reaction. Again, I cannot imagine how difficult it must be being away from your baby at that point and waiting, listening and hanging on for that phone call or that message to find out if everything's going to be okay. So I think with this bill, all I would say is that I absolutely endorse it. I wish you the best of luck today, and I would urge the Minister to please, from the dispatch box later, in her first week, she's doing a fantastic job in her first week, to make this go through, because I think you will have a legacy for generations to come who will talk about this day for many years. Thank you very much.
Right. Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a member of the Premature and Sick Babies all-party group, and as someone whose family's had experience with this, I want to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East, for choosing paid neonatal leave as the topic of his bill, and for setting out the case for paid leave so well and so fully. I'd also like to pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow East, the chair of the all-party group, for all his campaigning on this issue, which, as we've heard, is also very personal to him. Due to time and the fact that government are supportive and actually keen to get through a number of bills today, I won't seek to repeat the arguments that have been so forcefully made by many members following my honourable friend, members for Thornbury and Yate, Hartlepool, Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock, Charnwood, who nearly put a kibosh in the bill by claiming that we were fulfilling a Conservative manifesto commitment, but we'll gloss over that for now. Member for West Ham, and she has my sympathies, it is a mouthful, the constituency name of my honourable friend. Watford, and obviously none more so than my honourable friend for Glasgow East. Instead, I'll just talk briefly about our experience and of our good luck, actually, on so many levels. Because my wife Lynn had preeclampsia during both our pregnancies, but it was particularly acute during her first pregnancy with our daughter Emma. The care she received when she was eventually admitted was exemplary. I couldn't fault it. It was fantastic from start to finish. However, when my wife was first sent to hospital by her GP, having presented feeling nauseous, lightheaded and with various other symptoms, she was not taken entirely seriously. When she got there, and her blood pressure was up and down, and at one point it was diagnosed as white coat syndrome, and Lynn was sent home. But she knows her own body, and she didn't feel right at all, so she phoned up, went back to the hospital, and was eventually admitted. Emma was born 6.5 weeks early in an emergency caesarean, and thankfully she seemed healthy for a baby born so early, and certainly compared to many of the other much even smaller babies whose care was more critical and more urgent. And she was certainly loud enough, Madam Deputy Speaker, although our youngest, Ailey, has since managed to beat her quite convincingly on the decibel front. And my ears can attest to the fact that has not changed throughout the last near 16 years and 12 years. But once Emma, they'll be grateful for that. Once Emma was born, my wife sent me straight back to work because one friend spoke of the choices that we face and are forced to face in these situations, because she wanted my paternity leave to coincide with her going home from hospital with Emma, and so that I could help around the house following her caesarean. So the first thing to say, as other members have touched on, that it doesn't feel natural in the slightest to go back to work with a small, fragile baby girl in an incubator and an exhausted wife recovering from surgery. But back to work I went, because we do as we're told. Madam Deputy Speaker, sometimes. I went back to work and spoke. I certainly will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Certainly I was a former member of the APPG for neonatal as well, because it's an important subject for me. But just on a point of productivity and work, do you believe that people who are going through this situation, being afforded the space to be able to do it, will then go back to work and be more productive? And certainly other employees seeing this happen will feel that they don't need to make a choice between work and their families, and therefore they'll see this as a compassionate society, and they'll be better at work for it.
I certainly thank them for that intervention. I couldn't agree more with them. As it happens, as I'm just about to say, my productivity probably couldn't be measured because of the time I was back in work, because I went back to work and spoke with colleagues, receiving their congratulations and so on. And not long after getting in, I was called into the office by my boss at the time, Thomas, who essentially sent me straight back to the hospital and said that my place was by her side, supporting her. Moreover, that I wasn't to worry about leave or money. I was given additional paid leave for as long as I required it. My wife's boss similarly ensured my wife's maternity started at the original planned date. And this wasn't policy in either of those cases. This was at their discretion that this additional leave was given. So I want to thank Thomas Kelly and Steve Tomlin for their empathy and for their support. We were extremely lucky to have such empathetic bosses. However, it shouldn't, as others have said, it shouldn't be down to luck. Needless to say, I will do.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I'm here to support this bill because of the experiences of my sister and my niece Erin, who was born 3 years ago. I was actually looking after my other nephew and niece throughout that week. The importance of this bill and his own personal experiences that he's outlined would ensure that the stress that people are going through would be alleviated somewhat, and that they wouldn't have to worry about their leave or pay or any of these particular issues. And that's one of the real reasons why this bill needs to get put through today. Would you agree?
Yeah. I certainly would agree, my honourable friend. I'm pleased he managed to get in just before my final sentence, not least because his sister went to the same school as I did, but he's absolutely correct. So needless to say, I fully back the bill and hope that the Minister, despite and the Government, despite the mayhem all around her at the moment in Government, will see this paid leave rolled out as quickly as possible so that all parents are as lucky as we are.
Felicity Buchan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is a real privilege to speak in this debate, and I would like to congratulate the member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East. I hope I got that right. I'm Scottish born and bred, so I should get it right. It's also been very, very moving to hear of the experiences of many members in this House, including the member for Thornbury and Yate and the member for Glasgow East. I do not have children myself, but I think that we all empathise with the traumatic experiences which you have had. And I know I talk on behalf of my constituency that we think that this bill is simply the right thing to do. It's also very pleasing for me on a personal basis to speak in this debate, since until last week I was the PPS in the Bays department, so I was part of some of the discussions on this bill, and so it's good to see it coming to the floor of the House. And I would like to pay tribute to the member for Sutton and Cheam, who is going on to bigger and greater things, but he was an exceptional minister in Bays and was very, very compassionate and focused also, and has done great work on this topic. And I'd like to welcome the honourable member for Loughborough to her seat, and I know that she will do an exceptional job in carrying on this work. I'd also like to pay tribute to the many charities who have been advocating for this bill. Bliss has been mentioned on a number of occasions, but there are other charities also, and the Smallest Things and Tommy's have also been involved. And what I would also like to thank is all of the parents who have shared their individual stories, because that is the most impactful. But as my right honourable friend from Charnwood put it so well, people should not be asked to choose between their livelihoods and being with a very ill newborn child. And the scale of this issue is very large. I was actually quite surprised to read that 1 out of 7 children needs neonatal care, and over 50,000 per year will spend time in neonatal care. And as one of my colleagues said, this is often an ongoing problem. 80% of these children need ongoing medical assistance, and almost half end up back in neonatal care. So this is not simply a one-off event, it is an ongoing issue. There's no question that when a child is born prematurely or with major healthcare issues, the only place for the parents of that child should be by the child's side. And the Honourable Member for Hartlepool put it very well in saying that those first few days and weeks of close physical contact are so important for the development of a child. Also, critical decisions may have to be made while a baby is in neonatal care. These can literally be life and death decisions that are being made, and the parents need to be there when these decisions are being made. They should not be at work. They need to be there real time, seeing the development of the child's care. And while all of the medical staff do the most amazing job, there is nothing that is better than the focus of relatives and parents. And I've seen that in other situations where I have visited family and friends in hospital, that it is actually the care of the immediate relatives that can sometimes be so, so powerful. So I've talked about the scale of the problem, but I also want to talk about the intensity of the problem, because these are some of the most traumatic moments that any parent will go through. And the Honourable Member for Thornbury and Yate talked very powerfully about the mental health issues that parents may suffer. I was also quite surprised to read that 66% of fathers end up having to go back to work while their child is in neonatal care. And that may have been okay 30, 40 years ago, but I think we all now live in a world where we realise it's vitally important that both parents, whatever sex they may be, are very, very involved at the earliest stages of the care. And I think that is very important. And also, what is very important is that once the child does come out of neonatal care, that both mothers and fathers can spend time with that child. So I heard a few weeks ago that a lot of parents end up using their maternity and paternity leave in the ICU. And then when the child is released or goes home from the ICU, then they immediately have to go back to work at that point, so that they do not have the few weeks or months of bonding with the child once the child is home. And I would argue that if your child has been in neonatal care, so has either been incredibly premature or has had serious health issues, then you need that bonding time even more than you would if it were a normal, healthy child. Now, some people have said, does this put too much of a burden onto employers? But I would argue that that is not the case. I started off by saying that as a society, we need to do the right thing. And this is clearly the right thing here. But employers also need to do the right thing. And I would argue it is in the interests of employers to do the right thing. We're looking at an employment environment at the moment where it is incredibly difficult to hire good quality talent. We're looking at the lowest unemployment rates since 1974. So I would argue that it is actually in the economic interests of employers that they provide good packages for employees, because we are at the moment in a war for talent. And you can only secure the best talent if you are a humane, compassionate employer. And we know that most employers will use discretion and will do the right thing. However, we should not be subject to any employer's whims and their discretion. This does need to be in statute. So I am very, very grateful to the member for Cumbernauld. I'm going to keep it at Cumbernauld this time round, for introducing this important bill. And this is a Conservative manifesto pledge. We also had it in our March 2020 budget. So it is very, very good that this is coming to fruition in this House today in such a cross-party and cooperative manner. So I'm going to conclude my remarks by saying that I very, very much so welcome this legislation. It is the right thing to do. My constituents think it is the right thing to do. And there is no question that if you are in the situation that you have a child in neonatal care, there is no question that the parents should be in the neonatal care too. They should be doing everything that they can to support their baby, and they also should have themselves the support of society. Their place is there. It is not in work at that time.
Having observed that this bill has total unanimity of support in the House, I don't think it compromises my usual impartiality if I seek to add my congratulations to the honourable member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East. It's quite easy when you know how. Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East for bringing forward such an excellent bill, and having myself given birth to a premature baby 1 week after a general election and in the middle of a Conservative leadership election, I can understand some of the stresses and strains that have been expressed this afternoon. Oh, it's still morning this morning. Let us proceed. Ruth Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you for indulging me this morning. I wasn't going to speak in this debate, but I've been so inspired to hear everybody else that I feel I must add my personal and obviously our party support to this bill today. I want to thank the Honourable Member for Cumbernauld and the rest for bringing forward this bill. It's so important, and I want to thank the Deputy Speaker for her eloquent words there, which highlight just exactly why we're doing this. As a former physiotherapist, I was a paediatric physio. I worked for many, many years, and I'm very proud to be able to say I set up the physio service that goes into it was Special Care Baby Unit in the Royal Brent Hospital in Newport West, which obviously is now known as the Neonatal NICU Unit. It was set up because the evidence is so clear that parents need to be with their children at that stage when the babies are born. Babies born as young as 24 weeks, so that gives them 16 weeks to get to the normal gestational age. It's really important that parents are there from the very beginning. And the scientific research, which I'm very proud to say I was partly involved with, shows just how important is the bonding with the parents at that age from the very beginning. We've already heard eloquent speeches from others about the importance of breastfeeding, the weight gain, and just the calming ability of that, what physios would call handling, you would call cuddles, and obviously in Wales we would call it cwtches. It's very important that these cwtches are there and that mums and dads, we mustn't forget dads, it's so important that dads are able to be included in this. But also we need to remember the transition home as well, because after spending maybe 10 weeks in a very scientific, very clinical area, to take that little precious baby home is very scary for parents, and that transition is so important. Dad is there with mum to support that transition back home. And I would endorse all the points made by the others so far, by other eloquent speakers today. But I would urge the Minister to do all she can to make sure this bill progresses, in spite of any turbulence that we might be having because of leadership elections. It's really important that we get this bill on the statute books to benefit the parents and the babies across the United Kingdom. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure to be replying to this bill here today, and I do thank the Honourable Member for bringing it forward and all my honourable friends who are here to support it. I was very glad to see it top the ballot and for the Honourable Member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East to take up the work. I think the trick is to just say it quite fast, isn't it? But to build on the work of the Honourable Member for Glasgow East, who, as he outlined, he's been pressing for this for a long time. He talked about his own experience with Isaac and Jessica, and made very powerfully, as quite a number of people did here today, based on his own experience. Parents shouldn't have to be at work, shouldn't have to be worrying about work when their child is in that situation. And I think we heard from the Honourable Member for Thornbury and Yate, as I said, Glasgow East and Paisley and Renfrewshire North, as well as my friend, honourable friend from West Ham talking about Esme, who sounds absolutely delightful. Just what parents have to go through. And I know when I visited the neonatal intensive care unit at Southmead Hospital in Bristol, it's just heartbreaking to see those tiny, tiny little babies there in the incubators. And sadly, in quite a few cases, those children won't ever be going home with their parents. And I can't think of anything worse than having to sit there just watching a child with a very, very short life, just almost like waiting for it to die. But in many cases, the kids do get to go home, and it's brilliant to hear how they are thriving. And Madam Deputy Speaker as well, I'm very glad that to hear you talk about your own experience, and I think you are excused for speaking from the chair on this occasion. In a civilised society, we do have a duty of care for people who perhaps are, incredibly traumatic time in their lives, and as I said, it must be absolutely heart-wrenching to be in that situation. We've heard from Bliss. I think we all do want to pay tribute to the charities that have been involved in campaigning for this, and that they're there to support the parents of babies that are born prematurely or ill. As we've heard, 1 in 7 babies born in the UK receive some level of neonatal care shortly after birth. Thankfully, many do return home with their families after just a few days of care, but around 50,000 spend more than a week in neonatal care every year. The honourable member who moved the bill, he sort of said that some employers are understandably very understanding, but others are not. But in some cases, it isn't that they don't want to be. It's just as a small employer, it can be quite difficult financially to support parents in that situation. This bill will put everybody on an even footing. The honourable member for Thornbury and Yate talked about the ridiculous and impossible position that parents are put in when they're forced to choose between work and being with the child in hospital. And he talked about his tiny son, and when he said you just want to be there, I mean that is absolutely all it comes down to, isn't it? And that is absolutely where parents should be. They should be able to put work completely out of their mind when they're in a situation like this. We've heard that there are some parents, though, that are in an agonising position where they are forced back to work to cover their bills, and this is particularly true for fathers and non-birthing partners who are entitled to just these 2 weeks of paternity leave. But it does also affect mothers who run out of maternity leave if their babies end up having to have longer stays in hospital. And it is also about the aftercare that's needed when families are at long last being able to take their baby home, all these follow-up appointments, all the checks on the baby's health. And I think it's also worth mentioning, you know, sometimes this won't be the first child or the only child in the family, and having to balance, my sister, when my niece was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at a few weeks old, and just that trying to make sure that she was absolutely their priority, but 2 older children that were only toddlers and needed help and support, and trying to juggle all that is just so difficult. And in some cases it can be a lifelong commitment if the child does have disabilities and or continuing conditions. And I think just emotionally, even without those, just the logistics of having to be in hospital or attend appointments, just emotionally wanting to just focus on that one thing. I would say, you know, it is a little disappointing, and I think given the spirit of cross-party consensus that we've heard today, and I was when we were in government, I was the Friday whip, and I've been on many Fridays where there's just been like endless, tedious filibustering, and you know, it's just such an utter waste of time, and it's just very difficult to explain to constituents who really want you to support bills. And I was actually quite surprised when I found myself doing bench duty today, that the whip telling me that we're hoping to get through quite a few bills, and we're hoping to actually support them, we're hoping to get them into committee. And that is exactly how we ought to be working together. So I don't want to get too party political, but I will just say that it is disappointing, given that this was a manifesto commitment, that we're having to rely on a private member's bill to get it to this stage. Well, the Minister says it's faster, that's why we're doing it. But the government had consulted on this issue in the previous Parliament. They said in the official response then that the ministers remained very committed to a new entitlement, committed to it again in the Good Work Plan, committed to legislation in the 2019 manifesto. Then they were due to address it in the employment bill that has twice been trailed, then dropped from the legislative programme. So, and my colleague, the Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Industrial Strategy, said at the time when it was dropped that this was an extraordinary move. But we are where we are. I hope that we can get this through very quickly. This is very much something Labour supports. As we set out in our New Deal for Working Labour, we will give families the right to flexible working, paid family and carers leave, and greater ability for workers to enforce these rights. I just would urge the House, as I said, I'm very pleased to see the spirit of cooperation today. I would urge this House to give this a second reading today. I hope that we can get it through committee as quickly as possible, as the honourable member said, and hope to see it become law as soon as we can.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank the honourable member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East. It'll be Cumberland from now on, I'm afraid. For bringing this important legislation forward. And I would like to thank all of the honourable members who have spoken on this important matter today, and I'll refer to those in a moment. I am pleased to confirm that the government will support this bill. As a mother myself, I know exactly how incredible that moment is when your baby is born. A time which should be full of joy and excitement. It must be devastating to see your baby whisked away and in need of urgent medical care, yet feel unable to do anything about it except be there. I can only offer my full support to all those who have experienced this. That is why I'm pleased to be here today and pleased to have taken on this important portfolio. I am deeply committed to ensuring that the UK is the best place in the world to work and grow a business. We need a strong and flexible labour market which supports participation and economic growth. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my predecessor, the member for Sutton and Cheam, who is now... I'm sorry? Top man, yes, absolutely. Who is now a Minister of State at the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. I think you will agree that he was a committed and compassionate minister, and I am pleased to be following him and moving forward with this agenda, and I'll have to work very hard indeed to do it. Could I also thank the APPG for premature and sick babies and most particularly the Chair, the member for Glasgow East. I want to talk now about the bill that is before the House today. Neonatal care leave and pay will enable thousands of parents to care for and be with their children in neonatal care without worrying about whether their job is at risk. This bill has support across the House, and I am very pleased to see that today. Thank you very much to everybody. And this was obviously reflected in the debate. I would like to take the time to address some of the points raised by honourable members today, but first I would like to put on record why the government is supporting this legislation. As the honourable member for Cumbernauld has explained to the House, in the UK, an estimated 100,000 babies are admitted to neonatal care every year following their birth for a range of medical reasons. The United Kingdom has a range of generous entitlements and protections designed to support parents to balance their family and work commitments and maintain their place in the labour market whilst raising their children. However, for parents in the worrying position of having their newborn admitted to neonatal care, it is clear that the current leave and pay entitlements do not provide adequate support. And I'd like to refer to something that my honourable friend, the member for Thornbury and Yate, raised in an adjournment debate that he had on the 9th of February 2022. And I'll just quote one bit, please, if you don't mind. So the current system is also a massive barrier for fathers and non-child-bearing parents in particular. Earlier this week, 75% of parents who responded to a survey from Bliss, the incredible charity, said that they or their partner went back to work before their baby was home from hospital. Some of those children will still have been on ventilation and receiving critical care. Previous research suggests that the most common reason for that is they simply cannot afford to take more time off work. That is happening every single day right around the country to families of premature and sick children. And I think that is why we're able to be here today and to come to an agreement, I think, here. The government has previously consulted on this issue, and in March 2020, we committed to introducing a new entitlement to neonatal leave and pay. The government is pleased to support this bill, which will bring that policy into effect. Now, to address some of the specific points made by colleagues in the debate. First of all, obviously, may I thank the member for Cumbernauld for bringing this forward. Thank you very much indeed. And the member indeed for Thornbury and Yate and his personal experience that he brought so emotionally and compassionately to the table, to the chamber. The member for Hartlepool talked particularly about fathers, and I absolutely support what she said about giving extra time to both parents to be there for their child. The member for Ayr and Carrick and Cumnock, sorry, my apologies, and I'll refer to some of the points you raised a little bit later on. And the member for Glasgow East, again with his personal and very moving experience. The member for West Ham, who mentioned a specific case. And the member for Watford, who volunteered in his own Watford hospital, a legacy for all here today. Hopefully we will provide. The member for Paisley and Renfrewshire North, with his personal experience and his reference to his children, who are clearly taking after their father. And thank you also on his behalf to Thomas and Steve, I think you said, who helped you, employers who helped both you and your wife, and did all they could to support you as members of staff. The member for Kensington, who referred to the bill being the right thing to do, and also pointed out that bonding time, and we must agree that that's a vital relationship for parents at that time. She also talked about good employers already doing the right thing and helping with newborn children. And this is a bill that is a floor, not a ceiling. And I'd like to be able to just make sure that everybody gets a good level of care, and then other businesses who are able to may be able to put on top of that, just as the member said. Many helpful and support. And the member for Newport West, I'll refer to her point a little bit later on. And Madam Deputy Speaker, who's now moved from her place, who talked about what happened to her and a stressful time that she had in more ways than one. And the member for Bristol East, who pointed out that often it's not only the only child in the family, and therefore that's to be considered, and the very many helpful and supportive interventions from all sides of the chamber. The member for Thornbury and Yate raised concerns about the length of time this would take for the bill to be implemented. There is a cross-party support clearly today from this bill, and we hope it completes its parliamentary passage and receives royal assent as swiftly as possible. Setting up a new leave and pay entitlement takes time. It requires secondary legislation, changes to government systems which administer statutory payments, and businesses need good notice in order to prepare. HMRC and commercial payroll providers require at least 18 months lead time to implement such changes following royal assent. I have spoken with my officials, however, this week, and we are looking at what we can do to speed this time up. So I have noted that the members for Glasgow East, the member for Charnwood and the member for Newport West have all asked for that request. Yes, of course.
We're grateful to the Minister for giving way and grateful for the discussion she's having with officials in her own department, but will she undertake to also have a conversation with the Leader of the House and business managers to look at whether or not it might be possible to expedite it as we try and take it through the House side of things as well?
Thank you very much indeed. That's a good idea, and I'll certainly take that up. Thank you. The member for Thornbury and Yate also raised concerns about why the 7 full-day period of neonatal care is required before the entitlement is triggered. In response to this concern, I would flag that the policy is primarily intended to support parents of babies facing longer rather than shorter stays in hospital, and that the needs of the parents who are in this position must be balanced with those of their employer. When developing the approach, the responses from parents representatives groups and business representatives to the 2019 consultation on neonatal leave and pay were considered. Yes, of course.
Thank the Minister for giving away and the tone of her response so far, especially the point she's raised about being prepared to look at speeding up the implementation of the bill following royal assent. On this point, actually, it was a really small technical point. Actually, it just says, I completely accept the 7 days. I think that's kind of widely in line with what everybody was expecting. What I wasn't expecting was, I know it's a small point, but it appears to be the day after birth will be the first of the 7, so it's essentially an 8th day. I think we don't need to deal with it today. I'm sure we can look at it in committee, but perhaps you can just commit to taking that away, talking to officials in Bays, and we can continue the conversation throughout the passage of the bill.
Thank you very much indeed for the intervention, and absolutely I will take that away. Thank you. The member for Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock referred to other family leave and pay entitlements that are available. So parents have access to a range of leave and pay entitlements in their child's first year, giving working families more choice and flexibility about who cares for their child and when. Our maternity leave entitlement is generous. To qualifying employed women, we offer 52 weeks of maternity leave, of which 39 are paid, which is more than 3 times the EU minimum requirement. For self-employed women and those who are not eligible for statutory maternity pay, maternity allowance may be available. Both of these maternity payments are designed to provide a measure of financial security to help women to stop working towards the end of their pregnancy and in the months after their childbirth, in the interests of their own and their baby's health and well-being. We also recognise that fathers and partners play a crucial role in the first year of their child's life, both through supporting the mother and developing a relationship with the child. Paternity leave arrangements enable employed fathers and partners who meet the qualifying conditions to take up to 2 weeks of paid leave within the first 8 weeks following the birth of their child or placement for adoption. We do, however, recognise that paternity leave can be improved, and so we made a manifesto commitment to make it easier for fathers and partners to take it. We will be announcing how we will be doing this in due course. Shared parental leave and pay provides parents with flexibility over their child's care in the first year. It challenges the assumption that the mother will always be the primary carer and enables working parents to share up to 50 weeks of leave and up to 37 weeks of pay in the first year of their child's life. This enables mothers who want to return to work early to do so and enables fathers and partners to be their child's primary carer if the parents wish. To help make shared parental leave more accessible, we launched a new online tool last year which allows parents to check their eligibility and plan their leave. We are currently evaluating the shared parental leave scheme and will publish further findings in due course. And the member for Bristol East, I've changed your constituency, my apologies, queried the length of time it has taken to legislate to deliver this entitlement. In 2019, the Conservative Party manifesto committed to introducing neonatal care leave and pay. We consulted on the details of this entitlement and published a government response in 2020. During COVID, the government had to rightly prioritise our response to the pandemic. We are pleased that the neonatal care leave and pay entitlement is now being taken forward in legislation and fully support this bill. To conclude, these measures would provide invaluable... Yes, of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I wasn't intending on saying anything today, as this is particularly fresh for me and it's been quite a challenging few weeks. I'd firstly like to thank all my colleagues on these benches for the support that they provided to me and my family in that regard. But before she concludes, would she like to place on record her thanks and support for all the staff who work tirelessly up and down neonatal units across these aisles for the miraculous work that they do to keep young people alive and to give them the good futures they deserve?
Absolutely, and I thank you very much indeed for that intervention. Absolutely spot on and correct, and I fully support everything that was said. Thank you for doing that. To conclude, these measures would provide invaluable support and protection for parents during some of the most stressful days of their lives, when their children are in neonatal care. This entitlement is also backed by government evidence and analysis showing clear need for further support for these parents. Therefore, the government is pleased to support this private member's bill brought today. Supporting this bill is in line with our ongoing commitment to support workers and build a high-skilled, high-productivity, high-wage economy. It is good to see there is support from across the political spectrum in the House for this important measure, as is clear from the debate today. I look forward to continuing to work with the member for Cumbernauld to support the passage of these measures. Thank you.
Stuart C. McDonald.
With leave of the House, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I just say, first of all, how grateful and indeed humbled I am just with the way the House has spoken, passionately coming together unanimously in support of this bill. I was optimistic coming to the Chamber today of support, but it has taken my breath away to an extent. We've had one member suggesting a visit to my constituency. We've had a very talented former minister requesting to serve on the committee. The answer, of course, is yes, particularly if we can bring a friend. And we even had a very welcome and powerful intervention from Madam Speaker in the chair as well, which I think we all very much appreciated. A lot of us made very similar points, which I think is testimony to the work of charities such as Bliss and others, with how they have advocated the case and how we've all become very familiar with the arguments in favour of this bill. But lots of other sensible points have been added, which I was remiss to miss from my opening speech. And I think one of them was the benefit to employers of all this as well. Employers are overwhelmingly supportive of these measures too. They appreciate that having folk at work who have kids in neonatal care is no use to them, and they end up managing it through sick pay and other means rather than through a proper statutory leave. And secondly, also, I think the final point is so important. It's to welcome and highlight the fantastic work of staff in neonatal units up and down the country. I look forward to visiting my All Friends constituency in Wishaw very soon to see that firsthand. So again, as I said at the outset, I think the best advocates for this cause are those who speak from personal experience, and I'm really particularly grateful to MPs who have spoken from that point of view today, and I look forward to working with you all in the weeks ahead to see this bill through. Thank you very much.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. May I say aye? Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Congratulations, Mr McDonald.
Employment Allocation of Tips Bill, second reading.
Mr Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I am truly incredibly pleased that we have time today to debate this important issue and this bill. As the Member of Parliament for Watford, we have a thriving hospitality and service sector, and this means many of my constituents and those from surrounding areas work in roles where tips, gratuities and service charges are given to them. For the simplicity of my speech, I will refer to them as tips from now on rather than the full list. The reality is, for those individuals who work in those roles, it's an important part of getting a thank you and a token gesture in many cases for customers. And across Watford, not only are many people working in hospitality receiving tips, but probably everyone across Watford, because we're a very, very generous constituency, will have given a tip over the past few years. So for me, I was quite shocked when I found out, especially during lockdown, when I was in the summer period where we could reopen restaurants and we were able to go back out and be able to give tips, that hospitality workers couldn't necessarily guarantee that they could keep them. And I think most people would be shocked that if you give a tip through the business, say via a credit card, which is increasingly more prominent and popular to do now, that you can't guarantee that the end person, the person you gave it to or the team that you gave it to, will receive that. And of course, in most instances, businesses are totally fair and they're very kind and they make sure that those tips get to the staff who they've been given to. But sadly, as we may know across the board, there are always those who are unscrupulous and those who are unfair and will choose to exploit their staff and keep the tips for themselves, sometimes in part, sometimes in full. I'll take the intervention.
I'm really very grateful, and can I congratulate the honourable gentleman on bringing forward this bill. It's certainly one that I support, and it's hopefully a final victory for the long-running Fair Tips campaign run by Unite the Union. But as he says, we know that some employers can be extraordinarily devious and they can exploit loopholes in employment law at the expense of either the public purse or of workers. Can I ask what consideration he might be giving to future-proofing this law so that we can make it really difficult for operators, including those using digital platforms like Deliveroo, for example, to avoid the spirit of this very important bill?
Well, I thank the honourable member, but again, I'd like to say friend, for the question. I will be coming to this later, but it very much sits within the code of practice and making sure that at the heart of this bill, and the word you will see me repeat very many times, is the word fairness. And so absolutely that's baked into the approach that's going to be taken. And I'm looking forward to meeting, as I'll say later, with businesses, sector representatives and unions to chat about how we make that code of practice really work well and make sure it's fair for everyone involved. Now, as you will have known over the past few months, actually, media reports have highlighted that this taking of tips, especially by credit cards, and then perhaps businesses taking more than their, not just fair share, but taking some of the share that they shouldn't even be getting, has been increasing, and the media has reported that. And so, for me, one of the reasons why that's a concern and the reason why this bill is so important, not just in principle, but right now and as soon as possible, is the fact that we are seeing this rise in the cost of living. And many people who work, especially in hospitality, they shouldn't need to rely on tips for their salary. And I'm absolutely clear within this bill that this is not about topping up salaries. This is about a gratuity, a tip or a service charge in addition. But they should be able to keep it. And it should be absolutely at the heart of what we do. And that's what this bill is going to do. And that's why I say fairness is absolutely key, because we all know a sense of fairness. We know what's right and wrong, and we know that if we give somebody some money as a thank you, they should be able to keep that money or choose to share it with others. And that's what's absolutely the key of this. And in the work that's been done over the past few weeks to really try and get this legislation right, I hope people will see that in the bill, and the Code of Practice will cover that.
Yes. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way and for bringing this really important and I think overdue bill to the House. We're all thinking very much of the people in hospitality who will benefit from this, and I've been contacted by constituents who have had up to 15% of the tips removed from them in their pay packet. Now, obviously, this is going to address that. But also, importantly, this is something that will matter to members of the public too, because how many of us, when we go to pay our bill, ask directly, will the tips go directly to the person who has given us such great service tonight. And we don't know whether the answer that we get is going to be correct or not. This bill will ensure that we've got that security, that people who go and they pay their bill and trust that that tip will go to the person who's given them that service will actually get it. And I do hope has every success with this bill and that it will be backed up with a media campaign to let people know what is happening and to let people know that their tips will go to the person who actually deserves it.
My honourable friend makes such a brilliant point, and thank you so much for your endorsement, your support, and the work that you do with your constituency to make sure that that they're represented. And the stories you tell are the same as I've heard from so many members. In fact, a lot of members, I won't name them, but have come up to me and said, well, actually, when they were students, they worked in hospitality and they had this done to them. So this is something that really does cut through. And the point about the media campaign, I invite all colleagues from across the House to help me promote this as widely as possible. And I hope we get to the day in a few, hopefully in a year's time, hopefully sooner, perhaps a bit later, where you never have to, as a customer, ever say again, will you definitely be able to keep this tip? And that's one of the ambitions of this bill, and I'm hopeful that that will be the case. And when I speak to businesses as well, this isn't about bashing business, because most businesses are good people, good entrepreneurs, good CEOs, and most businesses do pass on those tips and they do it fairly. And for them, those that I've spoken to, especially again in my constituency and through fantastic members of Parliament across the House, they agree that business supports this as well, and hospitality absolutely does. So when I talk about fairness for workers, there's several key aspects to this bill that I will go through shortly. Oh, yes.
I congratulate the honourable member for bringing this excellent bill forward today. And I think fairness is the key word. And you've mentioned that you're working together with businesses and with trade unions. May I ask if you've reached out to the Cooperative Party, because I'm a Labour and Cooperative Party MP, and I'm sure that many businesses are cooperatives, and I'm sure that the Cooperative Party would be grateful if you would reach out to them. Thank you.
The honourable member makes a brilliant point, and the idea of the Code of Practice is to make sure that we do that engagement, and I'm hopeful that when we reach out to those sorts of organisations, they will also help with the media campaign, as has been highlighted just now. So this is about making sure everybody knows, and also highlight in the meantime that there are businesses that are not passing on those tips. So I hope people do challenge when they speak to businesses in the meantime. But there's several aspects that I will cover in this. First of all, in the bill, it's about greater transparency for employers and workers in teams of how tips should be treated, so that will be absolutely clear to everyone. The tip will create a level playing field for businesses who already pass on tips to workers in a fair and transparent way, which is in the most of them, but to make sure that they know that others will do the same as they have always been doing. And also to make sure consumers, as we've just spoken about, have the confidence that the full value of their tips will go to workers. And the premise of this bill is 100% that tip will go to the workers, and the Code of Practice will agree how that will be shared, and we can come to that later. So I'm going to set out the details of that, but I'll come to my member first. My friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And can I just speak on behalf of all the backroom staff in our hospitality venues? My son worked for many years as a teenager as a pot washer for very little money, but always felt really appreciated when he got that little bit of top up on top. That was his share of the tips. So that we should remember all those people as well, and how important it is to them to know that they're valued.
Absolutely, thank you, and I thank you for your contribution. And may I also say that the staff here as well in this place, because they are fabulous, and I know on occasions some very kind members of Parliament do give tips, even though it might not be reported. So in terms of the fairness for workers, I've covered some of those points, but I want to go into a little bit more detail, if I may. So in terms of the bill itself, where employers receive tips directly from customers or have a control or significant influence over the distribution of tips which workers receive directly, this bill will create a legal obligation for employers to distribute these tips to workers in a fair and transparent manner. This obligation will attach the total amount of the qualifying tips paid at or otherwise attributable to a place of business of the employer, and the tips must be allocated fairly between workers at that place of business. So, for example, if you've got a big chain, it's not about it then going into a pot to everyone who works in that chain. It will be at that specific location, that particular venue. I think the other part for this as well, which is absolutely important, is to note that where employers do not receive or have control or significant influence over a tip, that will stay the same. So if I were to give a tenner at the end of a meal directly to a waiter or waitress for them, and it's clear it's for them, this bill will not need to cover that because that's directly to them. If they've put it through the business, perhaps through a credit card, then that would be where this bill comes into force. Similarly, if employees have already got like a tip jar or something and it's theirs and they look after it, that again won't be covered by this bill because it won't have been touched by the business, therefore they won't need to have that involvement. I think the other part to say that the key part here, again, is just, again, the fairness to make sure that businesses and employees know exactly where they stand. But it's also about making sure there's some flexibility there. Every different business is different. That's the very nature. If you're working in hairdressing, you're probably going to have a different approach to the way that you receive tips or manage tips than perhaps if you work in a restaurant or perhaps if you work in a bar in a hotel. What we're trying to do with the Code of Practice is make sure, the Code of Conduct is to make sure that that's covered, and that's going to come after this bill today, hopefully, if we can. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt my honourable friend mid-flow, but as someone who's had many an argument with a restaurant manager about removing service charges in London to be able to give cash directly to staff, and has nearly been thrown out of restaurants for it as well, can I just put on record my congratulations to him for bringing this bill today, but also my thanks on behalf of all the hospitality industry workers in my constituency of Workington and across the wider Cumbria area that will benefit from this.
I thank my honourable friend, and I know he stands up so strongly for workers and for the rights of people across this whole country, and especially for his constituency. So thank you for that intervention. I am very conscious that there is a thing called the Tronc system, which I won't go into too much detail now for time, but Tronc is a system, an arrangement really, commonly used in the hospitality sector, where an employer delegates the collection, allocation and distribution of tips to a person or persons known as a Tronc master or Tronc operator. The bill does not seek to regulate the operators of independent Tronc systems, which are commonly used by businesses already. However, I am aware, and when I've raised this previously when talking through how to make this bill the best it could be, I am aware that some stakeholders have been a bit concerned that could a business then put pressure on a Tronc master to do something that's unfair. And so the premise of this bill to mitigate the risk is that workers can bring an employment tribunal claim if an employer's use of an independent Tronc is not fair. So hopefully that will capture any concerns on that front. Another aspect of fairness is also, as we've just talked about briefly, is making sure there's no deductions from tips. And so the core of this bill is the creation of a legal obligation for employers to distribute all tips, gratuities and service charges to workers without any deductions. When customers pay service charges, they expect that money to go in full to the staff or to the individuals they've asked for. Sadly, some employers do retain part or whole of the service charge without passing it on to their workers. And so this bill will cover that. Some honourable members, though, have asked me whether this legislation will also cover credit card deductions and admin costs. And I know some businesses have raised this with me as well. But since 2018, payment processing fees cannot be passed on to consumers. So in line with this, employers will not be able to deduct payment processing fees from tips. This also includes a mandatory and discretionary service charges, which are automatically added on to customers' bills by some hospitality venues. And I'm sure the member from Workington has probably had arguments on that front in the past, so he can be relieved that that will no longer be the case. Administering tips should not, though, be significant in terms of the cost to businesses' operating costs. But for workers, that admin charge that might go towards a credit card admin fee could be significant for an individual. You know, £2 or £3 can be significant for an individual as a tip. So again, I think it's fairness in here. It's making sure businesses don't have to incur huge costs, but actually that additional a cost that would come in from the tips actually is not significant for them, but it would be significant for the staff if they're taken out. So I think that's important to include that and to put that on record, and it's in the bill, of course. Ensuring that tips are passed on to workers in full with no deductions by employers will make a real difference to workers' lives, whilst not creating a burden on businesses. But an important practical aspect of the bill is, as I've noted earlier, the code of practice. And I'd like to expand upon that now, if I may, for a few moments. The bill includes provisions for the Secretary of State to issue a statutory code of practice, which will promote fairness and transparency in relation to the distribution of qualifying tips and help tribunals determine whether it is fair for an employer to make certain trunk arrangements. So employment tribunals must have regard to relevant provisions in the code when determining whether an allocation of tips or making of certain trunk affair arrangements is fair. The Code of Practice will consider some of the factors which will be relevant to that fairness, and it will provide a number of examples and real-life scenarios that exemplify fair tipping practices to help reflect the myriad of circumstances in which employers can handle tips in an acceptable fashion. The Code will be published in draft and consulted upon, as my honourable member mentioned earlier about the engagement. So it will be published in draft and consulted on before the relevant sections of this legislation come into force, and the Code will also require approval by each House of Parliament. So I hope that will reassure colleagues across the House that there will be scrutiny of that, but also that we'll make sure that that's being covered fully. The defining principles of the bill would not need to capture the nuances of that fairness as well. And as I mentioned, I want to engage widely on this to make sure that that code of practice really works. And I would say now to anyone who can reach out to me after this bill, if the government and the minister will please let's go through to the next stage and the House joins me in that, then I'm really keen to engage and make sure that happens. And I'm keen to hear those points. I think one of the core parts of this as well, though, is about remedies and enforcement. And crucially, the bill will be enforced by workers through the employment tribunal system and provides employment tribunals with remedies in situations where an employer has made deductions from tips or not allocated tips in a fair and transparent way. If an employer does not allocate tips fairly between workers, the employment tribunal can order the employer to do one of three things. Firstly, they could revise any allocation of tips they have previously made. Secondly, they could recommend that the employer deals with tips in a certain way. And thirdly, make a payment to a worker or a number of workers of the employer so that they receive the tips they should have received. The Employment Tribunal may additionally compensate workers for related financial loss attributable to a breach of these provisions by up to £5,000. And workers will also be able to make a complaint to an employment tribunal if their employer does not keep sufficient records relating to tipping practices, and the tribunal can order the employer to compensate workers up to £5,000. It is worth noting that workers must consult with ACAS before bringing forward a claim, and the majority of employment disputes are settled before they reach an employment tribunal. I would also like to be absolutely clear that this bill does not there's no rules within this that change things on taxation, so there's nothing in this bill that will cover changes in the way it is right now around taxation for employers or employees. This is purely about employers' rights and workers' rights. So I will conclude, because I want to hear honourable members' fantastic speeches that are no doubt coming up. I'm looking forward to hearing those speeches, and I would like to also thank the Minister and her predecessor, the member for Sutton and Cheam, for their incredible support on this bill to make sure that I can hopefully convince them today to get it over the line with colleagues. I would like to thank everyone who's helped me bring this bill to the House today as well, both members past and present, but also constituents and my fabulous Watford businesses and residents who have really raised repeatedly the importance of this. As we are all aware, the private members' bill process is fragile, so I'm keen to work together with all members, all organisations and everyone that I can to make sure that this works. So I urge the Minister to support this bill, and I will hand over to Mr Deputy Speaker to continue proceedings. Thank you.
There you go. The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and we've all learnt a new word today, tronk, which I will try in Wordle later. Felicity Buchan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Apologies if I sound repetitive, but in the last bill, I said I supported it because it was the right thing to do. I support this bill because it is the right thing to do. And indeed, my constituents, who probably spend quite a lot of their take-home pay in restaurants and bars, I think actually would be very shocked if they learnt that their tips, whether on credit cards, are actually the legal property of the restaurant owner. I think that would actually really surprise people. But I think that the timing of this bill is very important because clearly hospitality faces major challenges at the moment, in particular in recruiting staff. And I think that the more that we can professionalise the hospitality sector and the employment practices within the hospitality sector, I think the better it is and the more likely it is that we've got restaurants and bars which can be fully staffed. And this is very, very important to me because I represent a central London constituency. In fact, my constituency of Kensington and my neighbours in Westminster probably has got the greatest density of restaurants, bars and other leisure facilities. So it is very, very important to residents in Kensington. I was actually shocked to hear that my local gastropub pub is now no longer able to open on a Monday or Tuesday, not because it doesn't have the clientele, it's always overbooked, people waiting for tables, but simply because it cannot get the staff. And so we cannot have a situation where important businesses, which are so important for livelihoods and for the general economy, cannot function and operate because they cannot hire staff. And so I think that this bill will go a small way in order to make the hospitality sector more attractive when it comes to employment, because staff will know that they have a legal entitlement to their tips and they're not simply waiting for their employer to do the right thing. And staffing in this sector is going to be so important going forward. We need to ensure that we have workers that can keep the economy going. And now if you look at London, the tourist season is beginning to start again. I am delighted to see in my constituency that we've got not only domestic tourists, but lots and lots of international tourists who are returning. And so it is very, very important that restaurants, bars, other leisure units can continue to function. But doing the right thing is critically important, and professionalising this industry is also very important. And this is, again, very good timing, because as we're all aware, workers are suffering from the effects of global inflation. And it is global inflation, it's not a UK issue. So it is very, very important that employees are getting the proper pay package. I was shocked to hear that in the past, some employers even use tips in order to make up the minimum wage. Now, clearly, that is no longer happening. That has been ruled out. But it is very important that the intention of consumers is fulfilled. And that's very important, the intention of consumers, because when I go and I give an extra 12.5%, I'm not doing that because I think that my burger should have cost 12.5% more. Yes. I am doing that because I think that the waiter and the other staff deserve that extra remuneration. But one thing I would say is going to be critically important is the statutory code of conduct. And I think that we should not diminish the significance of that, because it is going to be very important how tips are allocated within the staff. And clearly there are lots and lots of staff working in these establishments, not simply the waiter who comes to your table. And so getting the fair balance between the frontline staff and the backline staff is going to be important. So we should not diminish the significance of that. And I am very, very well aware that this is simply one step, this bill, and getting the detail right is going to be critically important. So I know my honourable friend from Watford has talked about all of the consultation that he has already done, but I would really encourage him to ensure that that detailed consultation carries forward, because I'm very, very well aware that lots of restaurants are hierarchical institutions, and perhaps the person who is cleaning up the dishes in the back of the kitchen is not recognised to the same extent. However, clearly that person is an integral function of the restaurant, and clearly we as consumers may not see that person, but it's critically important that they are in place and that they are recognised. So I very, very much so welcome this bill. As I say, it's quite shocking it's not already the case. And I very, very much so appreciate the efforts of my honourable friend, because I know that he had introduced this bill in 2021, but that he dropped it in anticipation of the employment bill, which I am sure will happen at some point. But it's good, given the fact that the employment bill was not in the Queen's speech, that you are introducing this as a private member's bill. So a great first step in terms of getting this right for employees. But also, it's not only a matter of getting this right for employees. I actually think it's an important step for employers also, because I think it is very important that employers are on a level footing, that they are trading on an equal basis. And it should not be the case that one restaurant which does the wrong thing by its staff is able to offer cheaper prices to consumers and therefore is in a better competitive situation. So I do think that this bill is not only good for employees, but it's good for employers, because it puts everyone onto the same footing and ensures that everyone does right. And they're not only doing right by their employees, they're also doing right by their consumers, because consumers are giving that tip on the full expectation that it is paid to employees. So I want to sum up to say I am fully supportive of this bill. There is no question it is the right thing to do. It is critically important for my constituency, where so much of the economy is the restaurant and bar sector. It is the nighttime economy. So I'm very, very grateful on behalf of my constituents. It's also very, very important because it is further professionalising that sector. And we are going to find that in the post-coronavirus world, that lots of employment practices are going to have to be professionalised, because only if employment practices are professionalised will people be able to recruit staff. So in every regard, this is an important bill, and it is formalising what we all think is the right thing, that employees should be able to retain their tips, and it fulfils the expectations of all of our consumers, when they go out to eat and drink, and long may that continue.
Point of order, West Streeting.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, the Met Office has issued a red warning for the first time ever as a result of the heat wave that the country is likely to experience on Monday and Tuesday next week. I wonder if you've been given any notice from the Department for Health and Social Care of their intention to make a statement to this House about the health consequences for the public, not least given this red warning involves the warning there is very likely to be risk to life. And of course, the newspapers, the television screens, the airwaves are full of reports of overwhelmed ambulance services and accident and emergency departments. Given the Secretary of State failed to answer my urgent question on Wednesday, I would have thought the Invisible Man might make an appearance today to give the public the advice and the reassurance that our public services and our emergency services will be able to cope in light of this emergency.
To thank Mr Streeting for his point of order and indeed his forward notice of it. I've been given no notification that there will be a statement from the Department for Health or any other department today. Should that change, the House will be informed in the usual manner via the annunciators making that announcement. But it's timely that he has made that point of order in order that people should take advice, because this is unusual circumstances. And people should, if they're travelling, take water with them and indeed make sure that there's plenty of ventilation. And if they are feeling unwell, they should seek attention for that. So I'd like to thank him again for his point of order. Darren Henry.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And firstly,